The first time I realized my sister had been lying to me, I was sitting in a hospital parking garage, staring at a receipt I did not remember signing. It was printed on thin blue paper and listed a medication I had never taken, at a dosage no doctor had ever discussed with me. I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. 3 days later, a judge would read my name out loud and decide whether I was still legally myself. I turned 62 on a Thursday in late October, and I spent the morning doing what I always did when I was trying not to feel sorry for myself. I made coffee strong enough to cut through the dull ache behind my eyes, fed my cat, and stood at my kitchen window watching the maples across the street drop their leaves in slow, steady spirals. The air in Pittsburgh had that sharp edge it gets right before the first real cold sets in, and the neighborhood looked like a postcard somebody forgot to mail. Everything was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet. My phone stayed silent. No calls, no singing voicemail from my coworkers, no group text from my book club. I did not expect a parade, but I had expected my sister to remember. She always used to, even when our mother was alive and we were both younger and angrier. Lydia never forgot a date. She remembered anniversaries, appointment times, the names of strangers' dogs. She was the kind of person who could tell you what day of the week you were born on without looking it up. Like remembering made her powerful. I told myself it was fine. Lydia had 2 kids in college, and a husband who treated his own calendar like it was optional. She had work. She had a life. I had my job at the county library, my small house, my routines. I had learned how to live without needing anyone to show up on cue. At 10:15, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there was no one on the porch, just a medium-sized cardboard box set neatly in the center of the doormat, aligned with the edge like someone had measured it. My cat, June, slipped past my legs and sniffed the air, then retreated back inside with her tail low, as if the box had a scent she did not like. The package was heavier than it looked. The return address was a shipping center in Monroeville, not Lydia's home in Sewickley. The label had my full name, Catherine Ann Mercer, printed cleanly, no handwriting. On the top of the box, someone had placed a single strip of clear tape over the seam, and the tape had a small crease in the middle, like it had been peeled back once and smoothed down again. I noticed it, and then I told myself I was imagining things, because I had spent too many nights lately reading about scams and fraud cases for our library's senior safety workshops. Inside the box was a leather folder, the kind lawyers hand you when they want you to feel both protected and trapped. Under the folder was a small velvet pouch. In the pouch was a bracelet, not jewelry. Exactly. A slim medical alert band, silver with a pale gray insert, smooth and expensive looking. The kind of thing you see on older people who still jog, who want safety without looking fragile. A note sat on top, folded twice. Lydia's handwriting was unmistakable, the neat slant, the strong downstrokes. Happy birthday, Katie. I've been worried about you driving and being alone so much. This will give me peace of mind. It's simple. Just wear it. I love you. Lydia. I held the band between my fingers and felt the cool weight of it. On the inside, etched in tiny letters, was my name and a phone number that wasn't mine. It was Lydia's. Beneath that, in a smaller line, it listed my blood type. That made sense. Lydia had always been the one who insisted on having facts ready. But then I turned it slightly and saw another line, even smaller, almost hidden along the curve near the clasp. Latex-free. I read it twice. I did not have a latex allergy. No one in our family did. It was a small thing, strange and meaningless, and I slipped it out of my mind the way you set aside a piece of mail you do not want to open yet. The leather folder contained pamphlets. One was about advance directives. One was about healthcare proxies. One was a glossy brochure for a private geriatric care management firm in downtown Pittsburgh, all smiling silver-haired couples and tasteful living rooms. At the bottom of the folder, tucked behind the pamphlets, was a business card. Elliot Brandt, Esquire Elder Law and Estate Planning. I stared at that card until my coffee went cold. Lydia was not subtle. When she wanted something, she wrapped it in concern and tied it with a bow. She had been hinting for months that I should get my paperwork in order. She said it the way people said, "Get your affairs in order," when they meant, quietly, that you were getting old and could not be trusted to stay that way. I put the card back in the folder and carried the box into the kitchen. I sat at the table where my mother used to set out crossword puzzles for us when we were kids, and I tried to imagine Lydia choosing this gift with love. I tried to picture her standing in a store, asking questions, thinking of me. But what I saw instead was Lydia at my mother's bedside 2 years ago, holding a clipboard, telling the hospice nurse what medications Mom should have, as if Lydia's certainty could override every professional in the room. When Mom died, Lydia handled everything: funeral, estate, paperwork. She looked competent, grateful, exhausted. I let her take the lead because grief had hollowed me out, and because Lydia had always been the older sister who knew how the world worked. Afterward, she called me every week for a while, then every 2 weeks. Then not at all unless she needed something: a signature, a copy of a document, a confirmation that I was still doing fine. The silence between us had not been an argument. It had been a slow drift, the kind that feels harmless until you look up and realize the other person is already far away. That afternoon, I wore the bracelet to the library. I told myself it was a kindness. I told myself Lydia was just worried. It fit well, snug without pinching. It had no screen, no buttons, nothing to fiddle with. Just a smooth face and a clasp that snapped shut with a quiet click. At the circulation desk, my coworker Marlene noticed it immediately. Marlene had been a medical billing supervisor before she retired and came to work part-time at the library because she said she missed seeing people. She had sharp eyes and the kind of patience that made teenagers behave without ever raising her voice. "New bracelet," she said, nodding toward my wrist. "Birthday gift from my sister," I said. "Medical alert. She worries." Marlene leaned closer, not in a nosy way, in a practiced way, like someone reading a label. "Who's the contact number?" "My sister," I said. Marlene's lips pressed together. "That's unusual." "It's fine," I said quickly. "She's family." Marlene did not argue. She just watched me for a moment, then returned to scanning books. But the little pause she left behind sat in my chest like a pebble in a shoe. It was nothing, and it was enough. The next day was Friday. I spent the morning running a program for seniors about spotting fraudulent phone calls. I listened to them tell stories about fake IRS agents and grandkids in jail and sweepstakes they never entered. I smiled and offered printed resources. I reminded them to verify, to call trusted numbers, to tell someone. By noon, my phone finally buzzed. A text from Lydia. "Did you get it? Are you wearing it?" I stared at the screen. No happy birthday. No how are you. Just confirmation that I had accepted what she sent. "Yes," I typed back. "Thank you." "Good," she replied immediately. "Don't take it off, okay? It's important. Important." Another small word that carried too much weight. That evening, I sat in my living room with June curled beside me, and I tried to watch television. I could not focus. My hand kept drifting to the bracelet, feeling the smooth face, the clasp. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this was what it meant to have family that cared. But something about the way Lydia had asked, not if I liked it, not if it fit, but if I was wearing it, made my skin tighten. At 9:30, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Welcome to CareBridge Monitoring." I opened it because curiosity is its own kind of weakness. The email thanked me for enrolling, confirmed my care plan, and listed Lydia Mercer as my primary authorized contact. Under that was a line that made my throat go dry. Status: Cognitive Safety Protocol active. I read that line again. Cognitive Safety Protocol. Like I was a problem to be managed. Like someone had flipped a switch. At the bottom of the email was a link for authorized family portal access. I did not click it. I did not forward it. I just sat there, feeling the bracelet cool against my skin. feeling June's steady breathing beside me, and listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator in the next room the same way I had yesterday morning. I had spent my entire life believing that whatever Lydia did, she did because she loved me, because she was protecting me, because she knew better. And that night, with that email glowing on my phone, I understood that love and power can wear the same face until the moment you finally learn to tell them apart. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, the way I always did when something unsettled me, but I could not yet name it. The bracelet was still on my wrist. I noticed it immediately, the way you notice a ring after sleeping in it, a faint awareness of weight and pressure. I lay there for a moment, listening to the house settle, the old pipes ticking as the heat kicked on, June stretching at my feet. Nothing had changed. And yet something had. I made breakfast and went through my routine carefully, deliberately. Toast, half a banana, coffee poured into the mug my niece had given me years ago. The one with the chipped handle. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with another message from Lydia, but it did not. The silence felt intentional, like she had checked a box and moved on to the next task. By mid-morning, I was restless enough to clean. I wiped counters that were already clean, organized the junk drawer, stacked mail into neat piles. When I reached the stack of pamphlets from the leather folder, my hand paused. I had not taken them out again since yesterday. I told myself I would just skim them, that there was no harm in knowing what was being offered. The Carebridge brochure was written in a reassuring tone, full of phrases like proactive support and dignity-first planning. It described services that sounded reasonable on their own: medication reminders, transportation coordination, safety monitoring. There was a section titled Early Cognitive Decline, Why Acting Early Matters. It spoke in generalities, but the implication was clear. Someone had already decided this applied to me. I flipped the brochure over and read the fine print. Enrollment required consent from the client or from an authorized family member with legal standing. I sat back in my chair. Authorized family member. Lydia did not have power of attorney. She did not have guardianship, at least, not that I knew of. I went to my laptop and pulled up my email again. The Carebridge message sat there, unread attachments still waiting. I hovered my cursor over the link to the family portal. For a moment, I considered clicking it, just to see. But something stopped me. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, while Lydia helped me with my math homework. She had always been good at math. I had always struggled. At some point, she had taken the pencil from my hand and finished the problem herself, fast and clean, then looked at me with a mixture of pride and impatience. "See," she said, "it's easier if I just do it." I closed the laptop. At noon, I drove to the grocery store. I noticed the bracelet again when I reached for my purse, the way the metal caught the light. I wondered what it did exactly. The brochure said it was passive unless activated by certain thresholds. It did not specify which thresholds. I imagined invisible lines being crossed without my knowledge. Alerts being sent quietly to Lydia's phone while I debated apples versus pears. In the produce aisle, I ran into Dr. Samuel Ortiz. Sam had been my primary care physician for over a decade before he retired last spring. He was younger than most retirees, but he had talked openly about burnout and wanting to see his kids more. We stood there chatting about nothing for a few minutes, about the weather, about his new hobby, woodworking. He noticed the bracelet the same way Marlene had. "That new?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "My sister sent it. Medical alert." Sam tilted his head slightly. "May I?" I hesitated, then held out my wrist. He did not touch it. He just looked, the way doctors look at things, with quiet attention. "That's not one I recognize," he said. "Who prescribed it?" "No one," I said. "It's not prescribed. It's just safety." Sam nodded slowly. He did not press, but when we parted, he said, almost casually, "Katie, if anyone ever tells you you're declining without showing you evidence, ask for a second opinion. Always." I drove home feeling like the air had thickened around me. 2 people in 2 days had reacted the same way. Mild concern, no accusations, just enough to make me feel foolish for dismissing my own discomfort. That afternoon, Lydia called. I answered on the second ring. Hi, she said brightly. How are you feeling? Fine, I said. Why? Just checking in. She paused. You sound tired. I'm not tired, I said. Another pause. Well, if you are, that's okay. That's what the bracelet is for. Peace of mind. For you, I thought. But did not say. We talked for a few minutes about neutral things. Her youngest was struggling in a class. Her husband was traveling. She never asked about my day. When she hung up, she reminded me again not to take the bracelet off, even to shower. It's waterproof, she said. Trust me, trust me. Another phrase she used when she wanted compliance. That night I slept poorly. I dreamed of my mother's house, of Lydia standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom holding a stack of papers, telling me it was time. When I woke, my heart was racing. The bracelet sat in place, unmoving. Sunday morning I decided to go for a walk. I told myself it was to clear my head, but I also wanted to see if anything happened, if any invisible line would be crossed. I walked my usual route, past the elementary school, down to the river trail. I kept my pace steady. Nothing happened. No vibration. No alert. The bracelet remained silent, impassive. When I returned home, there was a voicemail waiting. This is Carebridge support, the voice said smoothly. We noticed elevated activity this morning, just confirming that everything is okay. Elevated activity. A walk. I deleted the message without calling back. My phone rang less than a minute later. Lydia, you went out, she said. It was not a question. I went for a walk, I said. I do that. You didn't tell me. I don't need permission to walk, Lydia. Silence. Then her voice softened. I'm just worried. You didn't answer the Carebridge call. Because I was walking. Katie, she said. And now there was a note of irritation under the concern. This system only works if you cooperate. Cooperate. As if I had signed up to be managed. That evening, after the call ended badly, I took off the bracelet. I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed. Carebridge alert. Device disconnected. Before I could even set the phone down, Lydia called again. Why did you take it off? She demanded. Because it's my wrist, I said. You can't just decide things like that, she said. And then she stopped herself. I heard it. The moment she realized she had said too much. I can decide things like that, I said quietly. I always have. She hung up without saying goodbye. I did not put the bracelet back on that night. I slept better than I had in days, even though part of me kept expecting someone to knock on the door. Monday morning, there was a certified letter in my mailbox. The return address was Elliot Brandt, Esquire. I did not open it right away. I set it on the counter and made coffee. I fed June. I sat at the table and breathed. When I finally tore it open, my hands were steady. The letter informed me, in careful legal language, that a petition had been filed expressing concern about my capacity to manage my own healthcare decisions. It stated that this was a preliminary measure, taken out of an abundance of care. It suggested I attend an evaluation. At the bottom of the page, my sister's name appeared as the concerned party. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I looked at the bracelet on the counter, at the smooth face, the hidden mechanisms. I thought about how quietly this had all begun. A gift, a note, concern dressed up as love. I had believed my life was my own. That belief had carried me through grief, through loneliness, through the ordinary aches of aging. Now, with a single letter and a silent device, that belief had cracked. And for the first time, I understood that whatever Lydia was doing, it was already much further along than I had imagined. I did not tell Lydia about the letter right away. I did not call a lawyer. I did not panic. I went to work. That Monday, the library felt louder than usual. Chairs scraped, Printers whined, voices carried farther than they should have. I kept the certified envelope tucked inside my tote bag, its stiff edge pressing against my hip every time I moved. It was a physical reminder that something formal and irreversible had begun without my consent. Marlene noticed immediately that something was off. She always did. "You look like you're bracing for bad news," she said quietly as we shelved returns. I hesitated. Then I handed her the envelope. She read the letter once, then again more slowly. Her mouth tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. "Katie," she said, "this is serious." "I know." She tapped the page with her finger. This language, abundance of care, preliminary concern. That's how these things start. I've seen it from the billing side. Once it's filed, it creates a paper trail that's hard to erase. I swallowed. "Lydia doesn't have the right." "Not yet," Marlene said. "But she's trying to establish a pattern." "A pattern of what?" "Of you being unreliable, confused, in need of oversight." The words landed with a dull thud. Oversight, like I was a project. Marlene folded the letter back into the envelope and handed it to me. "You need someone to look at the documentation she's using, not just a lawyer. Someone who understands how these assessments are justified." I stared at her. "Who?" She thought for a moment. "There's a woman I know, Dr. Elaine Brooks, neuropsychologist. She used to review cognitive evaluations for insurance disputes. If someone's manipulating data or misrepresenting records, she'll spot it." The idea of having my mind evaluated made my stomach twist. But the alternative was worse. That afternoon, I called Dr. Brooks's office. I expected resistance, a long wait, a referral requirement. Instead, her assistant listened quietly and scheduled me for a consultation 2 days later. "Bring any documentation you have," the assistant said, "especially anything related to monitoring or reported symptoms." I hung up and felt something I had not felt in days. Not relief, focus. That evening, Lydia called again. I let it ring. Then she texted, "We need to talk." "This doesn't have to be hard." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'll talk when I'm ready." Her response came immediately. "This is for your own good." "Katie, you're not seeing that." I did not reply. That night, I gathered everything: the brochure, the bracelet, the email printout, the certified letter. I placed them in a manila folder and set it by the door. On Wednesday morning, I drove across the city to Dr. Brooks's office. The building was nondescript, the kind of place you pass without noticing. Inside, the waiting room was quiet, neutral, designed not to provoke anxiety. There were no inspirational posters, no pamphlets about decline, just chairs and a water dispenser. Dr. Brooks was in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. She shook my hand and gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what's happening," she said. I told her everything. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I laid out the facts the way I would for a librarian's incident report. Dates, messages, documents. The bracelet. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making a note. When I finished, she picked up the bracelet. "May I open this?" she asked. I nodded. She examined it carefully, turning it over, checking the clasp, the inner engraving. Then she did something that made my pulse jump. She weighed it in her palm, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small digital scale. The bracelet was heavier than a standard medical alert band. "Not dramatically," she said, "but enough." Enough for what? Enough to suggest additional components, not just a fall sensor. She set it down and opened her laptop. "I want to be clear," she said. "I can't diagnose intent, but I can tell you when something doesn't align with clinical best practices." She asked me a series of questions. Simple things: date, location, current events. I answered easily. She did not rush me or prod me into mistakes. Then she pulled up a document on her screen. "This is what concerns me," she said, turning the laptop so I could see. It was a report, a cognitive screening summary. My name was at the top. I felt a chill move through me. "I've never taken this test." No, you haven't, she said. But someone submitted this on your behalf. The report listed mild impairments, memory lapses, reduced executive function. It cited data sources, CareBridge passive monitoring, Dr. Brooks read aloud, activity variability, non-compliance indicators. I stared at the words. Non-compliance. Like refusing to wear the bracelet. This is not how cognitive decline is evaluated, she said flatly. This is behavioral interpretation dressed up as medical concern. She scrolled further. And this, see here? Reported confusion during phone calls. Disorientation during errands. That's not true, I said. I know, she said, because it's vague. No dates, no transcripts, just assertions. She closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Katie, someone is building a case to suggest you're deteriorating, and they're using technology to create the appearance of evidence. My throat tightened. Can they do that? They can try. And often, they succeed if no one challenges it early. I thought of Lydia's voice. This system only works if you cooperate. Dr. Brooks slid a card across the desk. This is an elder rights attorney I trust, and I will document my findings. Formally, that matters. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. One more thing, she said. Has anyone discussed medication changes with you recently? I shook my head. She nodded, as if confirming something. Good, keep it that way. When I left her office, I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. The world outside looked the same. Cars passed. A man walked his dog. Nothing signaled the quiet war unfolding around my autonomy. That evening, Lydia showed up at my house without calling. I opened the door and saw her standing there, folder in hand, expression carefully arranged. You didn't answer my texts, she said. I didn't invite you, I replied. She stepped inside anyway. Katie, she said, lowering her voice as if the walls might hear. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I met her gaze. What are you trying to do, Lydia? She sighed, the sound rehearsed. I'm trying to help you before things get worse. Worse than what? She glanced at my wrist. You're not wearing it. No. Her jaw tightened. You're being stubborn. I smiled faintly. No, I'm being observant. She opened her folder, pulling out papers I recognized too well. Forms, evaluations, plans. I've already started the process, she said. This isn't about control. It's about safety. I thought of Dr. Brooks's calm voice, behavioral interpretation dressed up as medical concern. I stepped back and opened the door. You should leave. She stared at me, stunned. You can't just dismiss this. Watch me, I said. She left without another word. After she was gone, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. I looked down at my bare wrist. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to certainty. Lydia believed she was ahead of me. She believed the system was already in motion, too complex to stop. What she did not know was that someone else was now watching the evidence she thought she controlled, and whatever came next would not unfold the way she expected. The next 48 hours passed with an odd, suspended quality, like the air before a storm when everything looks normal but feels wrong. I went to work. I answered emails. I returned books to their proper shelves, but my attention kept slipping, snagging on small details that suddenly felt important. The way Lydia had stepped into my house without waiting to be invited, the way she had spoken about the process as if it were already settled, the way she had not once asked me how I felt. Dr. Brooks emailed me that evening. Her message was brief and precise. She attached a preliminary report summarizing her concerns about the CareBridge monitoring methodology and the so-called cognitive screening. She wrote that the data used to imply impairment was not medically valid and appeared selectively interpreted. She ended with a single sentence. I recommend immediate legal intervention. The elder rights attorney she had referred me to was named Thomas Riley. His office was downtown, above a coffee shop that smelled perpetually of burnt espresso. When I arrived, he greeted me with a firm handshake and no wasted motion. He was in his early 60s, with a face that suggested he had learned patience the hard way. I laid everything out on his desk. The bracelet, the emails, the letter, Dr. Brooks's report. He read in silence. When he finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Your sister is attempting to establish de facto authority," he said. "She's not there yet, but she's laying the groundwork. Monitoring, documentation, third-party reports. It's a classic approach." "Classic," I repeated, as if this were common. "It is," he said, "especially when there's money involved." I stiffened. "Money?" He nodded. "Tell me about your assets." I hesitated, then answered honestly. "My house, a modest retirement account, a small inheritance from our mother that I never touched. Nothing extravagant." Riley opened a legal pad. "Has your sister had access to your financial information?" "Not directly." "Has she helped you manage things? Filed paperwork? Reviewed accounts?" I thought back. After Mom died, Lydia had organized everything. She had insisted on scanning documents, on keeping copies just in case. At the time, I had been grateful. "Yes," I said slowly. "She's had copies of things." Riley's pen paused. "That matters," he explained carefully. "A guardianship petition often follows a pattern. First concern, then monitoring, then alleged decline. Once that narrative is accepted, control of finances and healthcare can follow quickly. Courts rely heavily on documentation, especially when it appears to come from multiple sources." "Carebridge," I said. "Carebridge," he agreed. "And whatever professional evaluations she can cite, valid or not." My stomach tightened. "How far along is she?" Riley met my eyes. "Further than you're comfortable with, but not too far to stop." He slid Dr. Brooks's report back toward me. "This helps. A lot. And I want to see the raw data Carebridge is using. We can request it." "Request it from Lydia?" "From Carebridge directly. They're required to disclose monitoring records to the client. That's you." The idea of seeing whatever had been quietly collected about me made my skin prickle, but I nodded. Riley drafted a formal request while I sat across from him, watching his pen move with steady confidence. When he finished, he handed me a copy. "This will force them to show their hand," he said, "and it will slow things down." That evening, I sent the request via certified email and mail. Then I waited. 2 days later, Carebridge responded. They attached a data file and a summary report. I printed everything and spread it across my dining table. At first glance, it looked clinical. Charts, timestamps, graphs showing movement, phone usage, compliance rates. But as I looked closer, patterns emerged. Times I had taken off the bracelet were flagged as anomalies. Missed calls were labeled unresponsiveness. Walks were interpreted as agitation. Silence was framed as withdrawal. They had built a story out of absence. What chilled me most was a section labeled medication adherence risk. It listed a drug I had never been prescribed, the same name from the blue receipt in the parking garage that had started all of this. I called Dr. Brooks immediately. "That medication," she said after I read it to her, "that's a cognitive stabilizer, sometimes used off-label. But you've never been prescribed it?" "Never." Then that entry shouldn't exist. But it did. It was embedded in the data, as if it had always been there, a phantom prescription, quietly justifying concern. I forwarded everything to Riley. His response came quickly. "This is significant. Someone input that medication manually." "Who?" I typed back. There was a pause before his reply. "We'll find out." That night, Lydia called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was tight, controlled. "Katie, this is getting out of hand. You're involving people who don't understand the full picture. We need to meet." I did not respond. The following morning, Riley called me into his office again. He looked more animated than before, a spark of something like anger in his eyes. "We traced the data entry," he said. "The medication field was added through an administrator portal. Not automated. Manual input. Who has access to that?" Authorized contacts, family managers, in this case, your sister. I felt a wave of cold move through me. She added a medication I wasn't taking to make me look non-compliant. Yes, Riley leaned forward. That crosses a line. That's falsification of medical-related records. I thought of Lydia's careful handwriting, her love of details, her certainty. Why would she do that? I asked, even though part of me already knew. Because she needs you to look unstable, he said. And because this accelerates the process. That afternoon, Dr. Brooks called me with another finding. She had reviewed the bracelet specifications more closely. There's something else, she said. The bracelet isn't just monitoring activity, it's logging response latency, how quickly you answer calls, how long it takes you to return messages. So if I don't respond immediately, it suggests impairment. I closed my eyes. Every moment of autonomy, reframed as failure. When I hung up, I sat alone in my living room and looked around. The house I had lived in for 30 years, the life I had built quietly, responsibly, all of it being reduced to data points and interpretations I had never agreed to. That evening, Lydia showed up again. This time, I did not open the door. "Katie," she called through the wood. "You can't ignore this forever." I stood on the other side, my hand resting against the doorframe. I thought about the medication entry, the charts, the story she was writing. "I can," I said evenly. "And I am." Her voice sharpened. "You're making yourself look worse." I smiled to myself. "No, Lydia, you are." She left without another word. When the house fell quiet again, I understood something with a clarity that surprised me. This was no longer about concern or care. It was about control, built carefully, patiently, behind my back. And now that I could see the machinery at work, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Lydia thought she was proving, the evidence was beginning to tell a very different story. Thomas Riley did not raise his voice or dramatize what we were facing. He did something far more unsettling. He began to plan. We sat across from each other in his office while he laid out the next steps with the calm precision of someone who had done this many times before. He explained timelines, filings, responses. He explained what we would do publicly and what we would do quietly. He explained, most importantly, what I must not do. "You cannot confront her again," he said. "Not directly, not emotionally. Every interaction from this point forward is potential evidence." "Evidence of what?" I asked. "Of your stability, or her manipulation." The words settled over me like a blanket I had not asked for but could not refuse. I had spent my entire life assuming honesty would protect me. Now honesty needed structure. Riley explained that the next phase would require patience. We would not stop Lydia outright yet. We would let her continue, let her commit fully to the story she was telling, let her put her assumptions in writing. "She believes the process is already working," he said. "That confidence makes people careless." "What about the medication entry?" I asked. "We document it. We don't remove it. We don't correct it. We let it exist exactly as she created it." The idea made me uncomfortable. That falsehood sat there, contaminating my records. But Riley was firm. "If we erase it," she claims, misunderstanding. "If it stays, it becomes intent." That night, I slept with the bracelet back on my wrist. I hated the feel of it, the awareness of being measured. But Riley had explained why it mattered. "We want continuity," he said. "Abrupt changes can be framed as instability. Consistency protects you." So I wore it again. I answered calls. I returned messages within what CareBridge defined as acceptable response windows. I followed the invisible rules I had never agreed to. And Lydia noticed. She began calling more frequently, not angrily, almost gently. "Just checking in," she would say. "How was your day?" "Fine. Did you remember to eat?" "Yes." "Any dizziness?" "No." She asked questions the way doctors ask questions, except she was not my doctor. She was my sister, and every answer I gave was being logged somewhere I could not see. At work, Marlene watched me closely. She never asked questions in front of others. But one afternoon, As we sorted a cart of returns, she leaned toward me and said, "You're doing exactly what you should be doing." It helped more than she knew. 2 weeks passed like this. 2 careful, quiet weeks. Then Lydia sent an email. Subject: Next steps. She outlined a meeting with Carebridge, an updated evaluation, and a consultation with Elliot Brandt. She framed it as collaboration. She wrote as if I had already agreed. I forwarded it to Riley. "Good," he replied. "Now we respond." He drafted the reply himself. Polite, cooperative, non-committal. I approved it word for word. Lydia responded within minutes. "I'm glad you're being reasonable," she wrote. "This will go much smoother if you trust the process." Trust the process. The phrase echoed uncomfortably. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a Carebridge office downtown. Riley advised me to attend alone. "They will expect you to be accompanied," he said. "Showing up independently reinforces your autonomy." I wore a simple sweater and slacks, nothing that could be described as sloppy or eccentric. I made sure my hair was neat. I took my reading glasses even though I did not need them, because not having them would invite commentary. The Carebridge office was bright and modern, all glass and neutral colors. A woman named Stephanie greeted me with practiced warmth. She shook my hand, glanced briefly at my wrist, and led me into a conference room. Lydia was already there. She stood when I entered, her smile wide and relieved. "Katie," she said, "I'm so glad you came." "Of course," I said evenly. Stephanie took a seat at the head of the table. She opened a tablet and began reviewing notes. She spoke about safety, about early intervention, about how families often struggle to see change. Lydia nodded along. I listened. Then Stephanie turned to me. "How do you feel about the monitoring so far?" "I feel observed," I said. Stephanie smiled faintly, as if I had made a joke. "That's common at first." I glanced at Lydia. Her eyes were fixed on me, expectant. I continued. "I also noticed an entry for a medication I have never taken." Stephanie's fingers paused on the tablet. She looked up. "What medication?" I named it. Lydia spoke quickly. "That must be a clerical error." Stephanie frowned. "I'll check the log." She tapped the screen. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the HVAC. "This was entered manually," Stephanie said slowly, "by an authorized administrator." Lydia shifted in her chair. "Well, I must have misunderstood something the doctor said." "Which doctor?" I asked calmly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Stephanie cleared her throat. "We'll need to correct that." "No," I said gently. "I don't think you will." Both women looked at me. "I have counsel," I continued, "and I've been advised not to alter records until the source of the error is documented." Lydia stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Katie," she said, "this is unnecessary." Stephanie looked uncomfortable. "We can pause the process if needed." "No," Lydia said sharply. "This is important." I met her gaze. "It's important to you." The meeting ended shortly after that. No decisions were made, no corrections issued. Lydia was tight-lipped on the ride down the elevator. Outside, she turned on me. "What are you doing?" "Protecting myself," I said. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "From what? Me?" I did not answer. That evening, Riley called. "You did well." It felt strange to be praised for surviving a conversation. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one from the court. A hearing had been scheduled to review the petition. 3 weeks away, Lydia was accelerating. Riley adjusted our strategy immediately. We would submit Dr. Brooks's report. We would file objections. We would request a full audit of Carebridge's data practices. And we would do one more thing. We would let Lydia think she was winning. "You want me to act compliant?" I asked. "Within reason," he said. "Agree to evaluations. Ask questions. Appear cooperative." It went against every instinct I had. But I understood the logic. Lydia's entire approach depended on the assumption that I was passive, confused, behind. Letting her believe that would keep her moving forward. and forward was exactly where she needed to go. That night, Lydia texted me, "I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I trust you," I wrote. It was the first lie I had told her in my life, and it was the one that ensured she would not stop until there was enough evidence to end this for good. After I sent that message, Lydia changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm anyone watching from the outside, but the tone of her attention shifted. She became more present, more invested, more certain that things were unfolding as they should. The calls increased, but so did the warmth. She asked about my sleep. She sent articles about aging well. She reminded me gently to drink water. Every kindness landed with the same weight as a threat. I responded the way Riley had advised: calm, consistent, cooperative without surrender. When Lydia suggested a cognitive evaluation with a specialist she had found, I agreed, but asked to bring my own records. When she proposed helping me organize my finances, I thanked her and said I already had a system that worked. When she hinted that my house might become too much for me soon, I smiled and said I loved it exactly as it was. Each answer was logged, each pause measured, each response folded neatly into whatever narrative she was building. Carebridge continued to call once every few days. Their tone was always neutral, never accusatory. They asked if I felt safe, if I had experienced confusion, if I had misplaced items recently. I answered honestly, which meant I said no. That no, repeated often enough, began to irritate Lydia. I could hear it in her voice when she called after one of their check-ins. "You don't need to downplay things," she said one evening. "It's okay to admit when you're struggling." "I'm not struggling, Lydia. Everyone struggles eventually." That certainty again, the way she spoke about the future as if it were already written. At work, Marlene noticed the calls. She would catch my eye when my phone buzzed again, her expression asking questions she did not voice. Once, during a slow afternoon, she said quietly, "She's trying to exhaust you." I nodded. I could feel it happening. The constant need to perform normalcy, the pressure to answer correctly, the effort of staying calm while someone catalogued your life. 2 weeks before the hearing, Lydia invited me to dinner at her house. "Just family," she said. "No paperwork, I promise." I forwarded the invitation to Riley. "Go," he replied. "Eat, be pleasant, don't argue." Her house looked the same as it always had. Neat, carefully curated. Photos of her children at various milestones lined the hallway. My mother appeared in several frames, always next to Lydia, always smiling. Dinner was polite. Her husband asked about the library. Her youngest talked about classes. Lydia watched me over her wineglass, studying the way I held my fork, the pace at which I ate, the stories I told. At one point, she said casually, "Do you remember the trip we took to Erie when Mom was still alive?" "Yes," I said. "It rained the entire weekend." She smiled. "Good." Later, as we cleared dishes, she said, "You forgot your umbrella last time you were here." I did not correct her. I had not forgotten an umbrella. There had been no umbrella. But the statement was not for me. It was for the record she would later reconstruct. When I left, she hugged me longer than usual. "You're doing so well," she said into my ear. "I'm proud of you." The words made my skin crawl. The following week, the cognitive evaluation took place. Not with the specialist Lydia had suggested, but with a neutral clinician Riley approved. The evaluation was thorough and exhausting. Memory tasks, logic problems, conversation. I answered carefully but did not overthink. I trusted my own mind. The results came back normal. Lydia dismissed them immediately. "Those tests don't always catch early changes," she said over the phone, "especially in people like you, people like me, educated, independent, resistant." Carebridge sent another report. It flagged inconsistent insight. It noted that I disagreed with concerns raised by family. Disagreement, reframed as denial. Dr. Brooks reviewed the report and sighed. "They're leaning harder now." I felt it too. Lydia's patience was thinning. Her messages became shorter, her calls more pointed. You didn't answer when I called this morning. I was in a meeting. You didn't tell Cambridge you were in a meeting. I didn't know I had to. You do, she said, frustration breaking through. That's how this works. That night, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the bracelet again, the quiet way it sat on my wrist, recording without comment. I thought about how easily concern had turned into control, how quickly love had become leverage. The hearing was 10 days away. Then, something unexpected happened. Cambridge called me directly, not for a check-in, but to schedule an internal review. We've received a request from your counsel, the representative said. There are some discrepancies we need to discuss. Discrepancies, I repeated. Yes. Specifically regarding manual data entries and interpretation thresholds. I thanked her and hung up. Lydia called less than an hour later. Did Cambridge contact you? She asked. Yes. Her breath caught. What did they say? That they have questions. Silence stretched between us. Katie, she said carefully, you don't need to make this adversarial. I smiled, even though she could not see it. I'm not. She hung up without another word. That night, I lay in bed listening to the house settle, the same sounds as always, but underneath it, I felt something shifting. Lydia had been controlling the pace, the narrative, the pressure. Now, for the first time, she was reacting. And I knew that when people who rely on control feel it slipping, they make mistakes. The internal review meeting with Cambridge was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They asked me to come alone. Lydia offered to drive me. I declined. The Cambridge office looked different this time. The same glass walls and neutral colors, but the tone had shifted. The woman who greeted me was not the same cheerful coordinator as before. This one introduced herself as compliance. She led me into a smaller room. No tablet, no welcome script, just a folder on the table and a recorder already running. We're conducting a routine audit, she said. But given the nature of your case, we want to clarify a few things directly with you. I nodded. She slid a document across the table. It was a timeline. My activity logs, call records, manual entries, alerts, all laid out in sequence. Can you confirm, she asked, that you have never been prescribed this medication? Yes. And that you did not authorize anyone to enter medication data on your behalf? Correct. She made a note. Then she turned the page. Several entries indicate concern about your financial decision-making. Do you recall expressing confusion about bills or accounts? No. She looked up. These concerns were attributed to a family report. My sister. Yes. The word sat between us, heavy and precise. The compliance officer leaned back. We've identified multiple instances where subjective observations were logged as objective findings. That is not how our system is intended to be used. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said carefully, that someone may have been using our platform to construct a narrative rather than monitor safety. I did not react. I had learned that stillness was my strongest position. She continued. We also traced the administrator access used to enter the medication data and modify interpretation thresholds. That access was granted through a family manager account, Lydia's account. Yes, the compliance officer closed the folder. At this point, we are freezing all monitoring interpretations pending the outcome of your legal proceedings. Raw data will remain available, but no alerts or assessments will be generated. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. She hesitated. There is one more thing. She opened the folder again and slid out a single page. This is an internal note attached to your profile. It was added shortly after the monitoring began. I read it once, then again. Subject resistant, high-functioning denial, may require firm guidance to ensure compliance. The words were clinical, detached, and devastating. This note, the compliance officer said, was used to justify more aggressive interpretation of your behavior. Aggressive. I thought of Lydia's tone, her insistence, her certainty that I did not know what was happening to me. Thank you for showing me this, I said. When I left the building, my hands were shaking. Not with fear, with something colder. I drove straight to Riley's office. He read the documents in silence. When he finished, he looked up at me with an expression I had not seen before. "This changes the case," he said. "How?" "It establishes motive beyond concern. It shows intent to override your autonomy, and it demonstrates misuse of a medical adjacent system to exert control." "Control," I repeated. He nodded. "Guardianship cases hinge on necessity. Your sister has been manufacturing it." My phone buzzed. "Lydia." I did not answer. She left a voicemail. "Katie, we need to talk. Now." I listened to it once, then forwarded it to Riley. "Do not respond," he replied. "Let her escalate." The escalation came quickly. That evening, Lydia sent a long email. It was emotional, defensive. She wrote about stress, about how hard it had been after Mom died, about how she felt alone carrying responsibility. She reframed everything as sacrifice. "You don't see how much I've done for you," she wrote. "How much I've protected you." Protected me from what? The next morning, another email arrived. Shorter this time. "If you don't cooperate, the court will decide for you." The threat was no longer subtle. Riley adjusted our filings. He added the CareBridge compliance findings. He requested sanctions for falsified entries. He requested a psychological evaluation of Lydia's claims, not my cognition. The hearing was 5 days away. On the 4th day, Lydia showed up at my house again. This time, she was not calm. She knocked hard, sharp raps that echoed through the hallway. I did not open the door. "Katie," she called, her voice tight. "I know you're in there." I stood in the living room, phone in hand, recording silently. "You think you've won something," she continued. "You think these lawyers care about you? They'll drop you the second this gets complicated." I did not move. "I was trying to help you," she said, anger bleeding through. "You were slipping. You don't see it because that's how it works." Her words came faster now, unfiltered. "You forget things. You isolate. You don't listen. Someone had to step in." "Someone meaning you?" I opened the door just enough to speak. "You lied, Lydia." Her face changed. Not denial, not shock, calculation. I did what I had to do. That was the moment everything crystallized. Not concern, not fear, certainty. The belief that she was entitled to decide who I was allowed to be. "You added a medication I was never prescribed," I said. She waved it off. "It was a placeholder. You labeled me resistant and in denial." "Because you are," she snapped. "Look at you, hiding behind lawyers, refusing help you designed." She stared at me, chest heaving. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, something revealing. Instead, she said quietly, "You don't understand how close you came to losing everything." Then she turned and walked away. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were steady now. The hearing was no longer about whether I was competent. That question had been answered. It was about why Lydia had needed me not to be. And for the first time, I understood the truth she had been hiding beneath all her concern. This had never been about my safety. It had been about power. The realization did not come all at once. It came in pieces, sharp and undeniable, falling into place with a clarity that made me feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. Thomas Riley called me early the next morning. His voice was measured, but there was an edge beneath it. "We pulled additional financial records last night," he said. "Ones your sister didn't expect us to look at yet." I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I had not touched. "What did you find?" He paused. "Your sister isn't acting alone. That much I already knew, though I had not allowed myself to say it out loud." "Who else?" I asked. "There's a man listed as a consultant on several documents tied to the guardianship planning. Not an attorney, not a medical professional, a private advisor." A name followed. Mark Ellison. I frowned. "I don't know him." "You're not supposed to," Riley said. "He's not listed anywhere that would normally involve you, but he's been billing your sister for strategic family transition services for nearly 8 months. 8 months. The timeline snapped into focus. 8 months ago was when Lydia's calls had shifted, when concern had turned into urgency, when she had started talking about planning, structure, safety. "What kind of consultant is he?" I asked. Riley exhaled slowly. "He calls himself a family continuity specialist. In practice, he advises adult children on how to assume control over aging relatives' assets and decision-making before formal decline is established." My stomach tightened. "That sounds dangerously close to exploitation." "It is," Riley said, "especially when paired with fabricated evidence." He sent me a file, emails, invoices, notes. I opened the first message and felt my breath catch. Mark Ellison to Lydia Mercer. Subject: Establishing baseline authority. The language was cold, procedural. It outlined steps. Monitoring. Documentation. Framing resistance as denial. Leveraging third-party platforms to normalize oversight. It read like a playbook. I scrolled. Another email. Resistance phase indicators. It listed behaviors I recognized immediately: questioning authority, seeking outside counsel, emotional withdrawal. He had predicted me, and Lydia had followed every step. The next email made my hands shake. Once cognitive concern is accepted by the system, family authority becomes default. At that point, objections are interpreted as further evidence of decline. I closed the file and stared at the wall. This man had never met me, never spoken to me, yet he had mapped my life, my reactions, my identity, and reduced them to obstacles. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why does he do this?" Riley did not answer immediately. "Because he takes a percentage," he said finally, "of the assets he helps secure." I was stunned. The word secure rang hollow. We dug deeper. Riley's team moved quickly. They found prior cases tied to Ellison. Not criminal convictions, but civil disputes. Families torn apart, elderly parents removed from their homes, assets transferred, sold, reallocated under guardianship oversight. In every case, Ellison was never the one in court. He stayed behind the scenes, guiding, advising, shaping narratives, and Lydia had brought him into my life without ever telling me. That afternoon, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. "Mark Ellison," he wrote politely, professionally. "Miss Mercer, I understand this process has become stressful. I'd like to speak with you directly to address any concerns and help de-escalate the situation." I forwarded it to Riley. "Do not respond," he wrote back immediately. "This is phishing." But the email unsettled me in a way Lydia's threats had not. Because this man was calm. Because he believed he was reasonable. Because he thought he could explain my life back to me and expect gratitude. That evening, Lydia called again. "You've been talking to people," she said without preamble. "Yes. You went behind my back." I laughed softly. "That's an interesting way to describe protecting myself." Her voice sharpened. "You don't understand what you're disrupting." "Then help me understand," I said. Silence. Finally, she said, "Mark says you're spiraling." "Mark. So you admit it," I said. "You've been taking advice from someone who profits from controlling my life." She hesitated. "He's helping me make sure things don't fall apart." "Things meaning what? My house? My money? My decisions?" "You're being dramatic," she snapped. I wasn't. I was calm. That seemed to irritate her more than anything. I saw an opportunity and took it. "How much is he charging you?" I asked. Her breath caught. That was answer enough. I ended the call without another word. The next day, Riley uncovered the final piece. There was a draft document prepared by Ellison, never filed, but saved to Lydia's cloud storage. A contingency plan. It outlined next steps if guardianship was delayed or denied. Alternative strategies. Assisted living placement. Emergency capacity declarations. Temporary holds based on stress response. My name was listed. My address. My routines. He had mapped exits. When Riley showed me the document, I felt something inside me harden. This was no longer just about Lydia's belief that she knew better. This was about a system that treated people like me as assets to be transferred. The hearing was 3 days away. Ellison sent another email, this one less polite. Delays only increase risk, he wrote. Cooperation remains the most humane option. Humane. I closed my laptop and went for a walk without the bracelet. For the first time in weeks, I did not care what was logged or flagged. I walked until my legs burned and the air filled my lungs, grounding me in something simple and undeniable. I was here. I was aware. I was myself. When I returned home, there was a message from Lydia waiting. He says we're running out of time. He, not we. In that moment, I understood something else, something quieter and more painful. Lydia was no longer driving this. She had handed the wheel to someone who saw me, not as a sister, not as a person, but as a case to be closed. And if I did not stop this now, I would not just lose my autonomy, I would disappear behind paperwork that claimed it was for my own good. The shift was subtle. It had to be. I began answering her calls again, promptly and politely. I stopped pushing back when she mentioned the hearing. I stopped correcting her language when she referred to the plan or next steps. I let her believe that the pressure had finally worn me down. She noticed immediately. I knew you'd come around, she said one afternoon, relief spilling through her voice. This doesn't have to be a fight. You're right, I said. It doesn't. That single sentence changed everything. From that moment on, Lydia became efficient. She stopped hovering and started coordinating. She emailed schedules. She forwarded documents. She spoke as if my consent were already secured, as if my resistance had been a temporary glitch in an otherwise predictable system. I forwarded every message to Riley. Good, he replied. She's moving into execution mode. Execution. The word sat uncomfortably in my mind. 2 days later, Lydia proposed a meeting. Not at the Carebridge office, not at her house. Somewhere neutral, the Elder Services wing of Allegheny General Hospital. Just to talk, she said. No lawyers, no pressure, just clarity. I agreed. Riley did not object. He simply reminded me to say as little as possible and to observe everything. The hospital conference room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. Lydia was already there when I arrived, sitting across from a woman in a tailored blazer who introduced herself as a patient transition coordinator. The woman smiled warmly, the way people do when they believe they are helping. Katie, Lydia said, standing. Thank you for coming. I sat. The coordinator spoke about options: supportive living, temporary care, transitional assessments. She used phrases like quality of life and reduced burden. She spoke about me as if I were not in the room. Lydia nodded along, occasionally glancing at me to gauge my reaction. I kept my face neutral. Then Lydia leaned forward and placed a folder in front of me. These are just preliminary forms, she said lightly. Nothing binding, just so we're prepared. I opened the folder. Inside were consent documents, authorization for information sharing, a provisional agreement for assisted living evaluation, and a signature line already highlighted. I did not touch the pen. I think I'm tired, I said quietly. I'd like to take these home and read them. Lydia hesitated. The coordinator smiled too quickly. Of course, the coordinator said. Take your time. But Lydia's eyes told a different story. She had expected compliance. She had planned for it. That evening, Lydia called Mark Ellison. I did not hear the call, but I knew it happened because she told me the next day. He thinks we should move faster, she said, before things get complicated again. I nodded. Maybe he's right. She smiled, relief flickering across her face. The next few days were a blur of careful performance. I asked questions that suggested confusion without committing to it. I repeated concerns Lydia had already raised. I allowed myself to appear uncertain, overwhelmed. It was exhausting. Riley reassured me repeatedly. You're doing exactly what we need. She's documenting everything herself now. Sure enough, Lydia began emailing summaries of our conversations. She framed them as helpful reminders. Katie seemed unsure today about managing appointments. Katie expressed concern about living alone long-term. Katie agreed that support might be beneficial. Each message was another brick in the structure she was building. 3 days before the hearing, she made her move. She showed up at my house with Mark Ellison. I was not expecting him, but Riley was. I did not let them inside. Mark stood on the porch, tall, confident, wearing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Lydia hovered slightly behind him, deferential in a way I had never seen before. "Miss Mercer," Mark said smoothly, "thank you for seeing us. I did not invite him in. He did not seem to mind. I understand this process has felt overwhelming," he continued. "My role is simply to help families navigate difficult transitions with dignity." "Dignity," I repeated. He nodded. "Exactly." Lydia stepped forward. "We just want to make sure you're safe, Katie." I looked at her, really looked. At the tension in her jaw, the certainty in her posture, the way she avoided my eyes. "I believe you do," I said. Mark smiled. "That's all we need." He pulled out a folder and held it between us. Inside, I could see more forms, more signatures waiting. "This doesn't have to go to court," he said gently. "Courts are stressful, public. You deserve peace." I thought of the contingency plan, the alternative strategies, the exits he had mapped. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then it returned. "Then we proceed with the evaluation as scheduled," he said. "The court will decide." I nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good," Lydia said quickly. "Then we're aligned." They left believing they had cornered me. That night, I sent Riley a single text. They brought him to my house. His reply came seconds later. "Perfect." The hearing was the next morning. I slept better than I had in weeks. At dawn, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the bracelet one last time. I unclasped it and placed it gently on the counter. Then I picked up my folder, my keys, and my coat, and walked out the door alone. Lydia and Mark believed I was walking into that courtroom, ready to surrender. They had no idea what evidence was already waiting for them there, and they had no idea that the story they thought they were controlling was about to be told in full, without their permission. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a row of wooden benches that creaked when people shifted their weight. It did not look like a place where lives were dismantled. But I had learned that most damage happens in ordinary rooms. I arrived early, as Riley instructed. He was already there, seated at the counsel table, reviewing documents with the same calm focus he brought to everything. When he saw me, he nodded once. No reassurance, no last-minute advice, just acknowledgement. Lydia entered 10 minutes later. She looked composed, almost relieved. She wore a navy blazer and carried a thick folder tucked under her arm. Mark Ellison followed her, a step behind, his expression neutral, confident, as if he had done this many times before. They did not look at me. The judge entered, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back neatly. Her movements were efficient, her expression unreadable. She took her seat and reviewed the docket. "Petition for guardianship and capacity review," she said. "Mercer." Lydia straightened. Riley stood. "Your Honor, before we proceed, we request to submit supplemental evidence and call a brief witness from Carebridge Compliance." Mark's head turned sharply for the first time. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Riley handed documents to the clerk. The room was quiet, except for the soft rustle of paper. He spoke clearly, without embellishment. He laid out the timeline, the monitoring, the manual data entries, the fabricated medication record, the internal note labeling me resistant and in denial. He did not accuse. He presented. Then the Carebridge compliance officer took the stand. She spoke professionally, carefully. She explained how the system was intended to work, how it had been misused, how subjective observations had been logged as objective findings, how administrator access had been used improperly. "Who had that access?" the judge asked. The compliance officer glanced at her notes. "Lydia Mercer." A murmur rippled through the benches. Mark stood abruptly. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said calmly. "Sit down." The compliance officer continued. She described the internal audit, the freezing of interpretations, the acknowledgement that the platform had been leveraged to create a misleading narrative. When she stepped down, the room felt different, heavier, focused. Riley called Dr. Brooks next. She testified with quiet authority. She explained why the data did not support a diagnosis, why disagreement had been mischaracterized as denial, why behavioral compliance was not a clinical measure. Then Riley turned toward Lydia. "Miss Mercer," he said, "did you enter a medication into your sister's monitoring profile?" Lydia's attorney stood. "My client was acting out of concern." "Did you enter it?" Riley repeated. Lydia hesitated. Mark's eyes were fixed on her now. "I may have misunderstood something," she said. The judge leaned forward. "Did you enter it, Miss Mercer?" "Yes," Lydia said quietly. "Why?" "Because I was worried," she said, her voice trembling now. She wasn't taking this seriously. Riley nodded. "And you labeled her resistant and in denial?" "I was trying to help." The judge looked at Mark. "Mr. Ellison, you are listed as an advisor in this matter. Stand." Mark rose smoothly. The judge's gaze sharpened. "You are not a licensed attorney or medical professional." "Correct, Your Honor." "Yet you advised Miss Mercer on how to proceed." "Yes." The judge flipped through a document, including guidance on framing resistance as cognitive decline. Mark paused. "I provide strategic support to families navigating difficult transitions." The judge closed the file. "You advised falsifying medical adjacent records." Mark's composure cracked just slightly. "I advised documentation." "Documentation of what?" the judge asked. He did not answer. The judge turned back to Lydia. "Miss Mercer, did you profit or expect to profit from gaining control over your sister's assets?" Lydia shook her head frantically. No, this wasn't about money." Riley stood again. "Your Honor, may we submit Exhibit D?" The clerk accepted the file. It contained Mark Ellison's invoices. Percentage-based compensation tied to asset control outcomes. The judge read silently. "Ms. Mercer," the judge said finally, "this petition is denied." Lydia gasped. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am referring this matter for investigation into potential exploitation and falsification of records." Mark's face drained of color. "Miss Mercer," the judge said, "you will have no further authority over your sister's medical or financial affairs." She turned to me for the first time. "Miss Catherine Mercer, you are found fully competent. Any future petitions must meet an exceptionally high evidentiary standard." The gavel struck. It was over. Lydia collapsed into her chair, shaking. Mark gathered his papers quickly, avoiding everyone's eyes. Riley touched my arm. "You did well." Outside the courtroom, Lydia approached me, tears streaking her face. "I was trying to help you," she said. "He told me this was the only way." I looked at her, really looked. "You tried to erase me," I said quietly. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Mark did not speak to me as he passed. He did not need to. Everything he had built depended on silence and compliance. And now it had been dragged into the light. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The air outside felt sharper, cleaner. The city moved around me as it always had, indifferent to the quiet battle that had just ended. But I knew this was not the end of the story. Because while the court had stripped Lydia of her power over me, it had also stripped away the illusion she had been living under. And consequences, I had learned, do not end when a gavel falls. They only begin. The weeks after the hearing passed more slowly than I expected. I had imagined relief would come all at once, a clean, emotional release that would let me breathe again. Instead, what followed was a quiet recalibration, like learning to walk on a leg that had healed but still ached when the weather changed. Lydia did not call. At first, I kept expecting my phone to ring. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because silence had never been her response to conflict. Silence meant retreat, and retreat had never been her strength. But days passed, then a full week, and nothing came. Thomas Riley handled the formal aftermath. He filed motions to permanently seal certain records, ensuring that the fabricated data could never resurface in another attempt. He sent letters to Cambridge, outlining corrective actions and legal exposure. He coordinated with Dr. Brooks to ensure her findings were entered into my permanent medical record, not as a defense, but as a safeguard. Every step was methodical, necessary, exhausting. Cambridge issued a formal apology. It was written in careful language, acknowledging procedural failures without admitting wrongdoing. They terminated Lydia's administrative access and revised their internal policies. None of it felt personal. None of it needed to. Mark Ellison disappeared. Riley told me that several families connected to his past cases had come forward once word spread. Civil investigations were underway. Whether anything would stick, no one knew. Men like him thrived in gray areas, where harm hid behind professional language and plausible concern. But he was gone from my life, and that was enough. Lydia resurfaced 3 weeks later. I came home from work to find a letter in my mailbox. Not certified, handwritten. The envelope was addressed in the careful script I had known my entire life. I did not open it right away. I made tea. I fed June. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the afternoon light slide across the floor. When I finally tore the envelope open, my hands were steady. The letter was 3 pages long. Lydia wrote about stress, about fear, about how overwhelmed she had been after Mom died. She wrote about how Mark had seemed knowledgeable, reassuring, confident. She wrote that she had believed she was doing the right thing. She apologized, not for lying, not for falsifying records, not for trying to take control of my life. She apologized for how everything had turned out. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I did not respond. That decision surprised even me. I had spent my life explaining myself to Lydia, clarifying, softening, adjusting. Silence felt like a betrayal of habit, but I had learned something during those weeks. Silence was not abandonment. It was boundary. At work, Marlene watched me closely, the way people do when they know someone has survived something they cannot quite name. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon. I thought about it. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just not bracing all the time anymore. She nodded. "That'll do it." I made changes quietly. I closed accounts Lydia had once helped manage and opened new ones at a different bank. I updated my will with an attorney of my own choosing. I revoked every authorization I had ever granted out of convenience or trust. None of it was dramatic. It was careful, deliberate. I took the bracelet out of the drawer one last time. I looked at its smooth face, the way it had sat against my skin while my life was being measured and reinterpreted without my knowledge. Then, I placed it in a padded envelope and mailed it back to Cambridge, along with a formal request for destruction. I did not keep it as a reminder. Some reminders do not deserve space. The court proceedings against Lydia did not result in criminal charges. Riley had prepared me for that. Intent was difficult to prove beyond exploitation. The system favored restraint, but consequences still arrived. Lydia lost her position as executor of a distant relative's estate. She was quietly removed from a nonprofit board where she had handled finances. People stopped asking her for help with complicated things. Control, once exposed, loses its shine. We did not speak for months. Then, one afternoon in early spring, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "It's Lydia. I just wanted you to know I started therapy." I stared at the message for a long time. I did not reply. I walked instead, down to the river trail, along the path where the water moved steadily, unconcerned with my past or my family. I breathed in the cool air and felt the simple, undeniable truth of my body in motion. I was here. I was capable. I was not disappearing. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. In the quiet hours before morning, I understood something that had eluded me before. Lydia had not just wanted control. She had needed certainty, the kind that comes from believing you know better than everyone else, that your version of reality is the safest one. I had threatened that certainty simply by existing outside her influence. The court had restored my autonomy. But it was the aftermath that taught me its true value. Autonomy is not loud. It does not announce itself. It lives in small decisions, in silence, in the choice not to explain. And I was finally learning how to keep it. Spring settled into Pittsburgh slowly that year, as if the city itself needed time to trust that winter was truly over. The river rose and fell with the rain, the trees filled in again, and the sharp edges of the days softened. I noticed these things in a way I had not before. When you spend months defending your right to exist as yourself, ordinary continuity begins to feel precious. Life did not return to what it had been. It became something else, quieter, more deliberate. I stopped waiting for Lydia to reach out. I stopped rehearsing what I might say if she did. I learned how much mental space that waiting had taken up without my realizing it. When it was gone, the days felt wider. I continued working at the library. I took on an extra program for seniors about digital privacy and consent. I did not tell my story in detail. I did not need to. I spoke instead about systems, about how concern can become control when it is not checked, about the importance of understanding what you agree to and who benefits from your compliance. People listened. Some nodded too quickly. Some asked careful questions. A few stayed after to talk. One afternoon, a woman in her 70s pulled me aside and said, "My daughter says I'm forgetting things, but she won't let me see what she's writing down." I gave her Dr. Brooks's card. That felt like justice of a quieter kind. Summer came. I painted my back porch. I planted herbs that grew unevenly but stubbornly. I adopted a routine that belonged entirely to me. Morning walks, evening reading, Sundays spent nowhere I had to explain myself. Then, in August, Thomas Riley called me with news I had not expected. "There's something you should know," he said. It came up during the Ellison investigation. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where this had all begun. Mark Ellison had not chosen Lydia at random. He had found her through a referral network that flagged adult children with access to estates but limited authority. He targeted families where one sibling lived alone, was older, and had a professional history suggesting independence. Librarian, stable, predictable. He called it low-resistance transfer potential. And Lydia had not been his first attempt to reach me. Riley sent me a copy of an old email, dated nearly a year earlier, sent to Lydia's work address. Subject: Proactive Family Planning Opportunity. In it, Ellison had outlined concerns about me before Lydia had ever raised them. He had suggested early monitoring. He had planted the idea. Lydia had not started this. She had been recruited. The realization did not absolve her, but it clarified something I had struggled to understand. Lydia had not woken up one day and decided to erase me. She had been taught how, guided, encouraged, rewarded for compliance. The system had not just enabled her instincts, it had sharpened them. That night, I sat alone in my living room and let myself feel something I had not allowed before. Grief. Not for the sister I had lost, but for the one I had thought I had. The one who used to braid my hair when we were girls, who once stayed up all night with me before an exam, who knew my coffee order without asking. People do not become dangerous all at once. They become certain first. In October, on my 63rd birthday, my phone rang in the morning. It was Lydia. I watched it ring. I did not answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. "I just wanted to say happy birthday, Katie. I hope you're well. I'm working on things." I deleted the message without listening again. That afternoon, I walked down to the river with June's leash wrapped around my wrist, the sun warm on my face. I sat on a bench and watched the water move steadily past, carrying whatever it carried, keeping nothing. I thought about how close I had come to being reduced to a file, a set of interpretations, a story someone else told convincingly enough to become truth. I thought about how easily love can be weaponized when it is mixed with certainty and fear. And I thought about the quiet strength of knowing who you are when no one else gets to decide. I went home and made myself dinner. I ate slowly. I washed the dishes and dried them and put them away. I locked my door not because I was afraid, but because it was my door. Somewhere, Lydia was learning how to live without control. Somewhere, Mark Ellison was facing consequences he had never planned for. Somewhere, other families were asking better questions sooner. As for me, I was still here, not monitored, not managed, not interpreted, just present, intact, and finally free in ways I had not known I needed. And that, I learned, is what real safety feels like.